If your family treats your generosity like an ATM, this story will show you exactly what happens when the money stops flowing. My name is Amanda Martinez, and for 3 years, I was my family's personal bank account. What I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and financial boundaries. It started innocently enough. A phone call here, a text there. Amanda, honey, can you help us out just this once? But just this once became a monthly ritual, then a weekly expectation, and eventually a way of life that nearly destroyed my financial future and my self-respect. For 3 years, I'd been the family's financial safety net. Every crisis, every emergency, every unexpected expense somehow became my responsibility. As I sat in my apartment last October, staring at my laptop screen with my bank statement pulled up, the numbers told a story I didn't want to believe. The Excel spreadsheet I'd been avoiding for months finally forced me to face the truth about what my generosity had actually cost me. Dad's car repair in March, $2,500. He thanked me for exactly 1 day before complaining that the mechanic had scratched his paint. Mom's medical bills from her emergency room visit, $3,200. She never mentioned it again, not even a follow-up call to let me know she was feeling better. My brother Michael's college debt payment to keep him from dropping out, $2,300. He acted like it never happened, posting Instagram stories from expensive restaurants while I ate ramen noodles for dinner. The pattern was always the same. The urgent phone call, usually around dinner time when I was tired and my guard was down. The emotional manipulation disguised as family love. We're family, Amanda. Family helps family. Then came the promises that this would be the last time, that they'd pay me back as soon as things got better. But things never got better. There was always another crisis, another emergency, another reason why my bank account needed to take a hit for the greater good of the Martinez family unit. But here's what nobody tells you about being the family ATM. You start to lose yourself in the process. You begin to measure your worth by how much you can give, how much you can sacrifice, how much pain you can absorb without complaint. I was so focused on being the good daughter, the reliable one, the problem solver, that I forgot to ask myself a simple question. What about my own life? What about my own dreams? What about my own financial security? The warning signs had been there all along, but I was too deep in the fog of family obligation to see them clearly. There was the way they'd guilt-trip me during phone calls, making me feel selfish for even hesitating before saying yes to their requests. We're struggling here, Amanda. We thought we could count on you. And there was the emergency manipulation, where every request came with a sense of urgency that made it impossible to think rationally. This is urgent. We need help now. The electricity is getting shut off tomorrow. And then there was the appreciation theater, that temporary gratitude that would last just long enough to make me feel good about helping, before fading into expectation and entitlement. They'd thank me profusely when I sent the money, telling me what a wonderful daughter and sister I was, how lucky they were to have me. But within days, it was as if the help had never happened. No follow-up, no updates, no acknowledgement that I had made a real sacrifice to help them out. I started noticing how they'd control information too, never giving me the full picture of their financial situation. I never saw bills, never got a breakdown of expenses, never understood where the money was actually going. It was always just a number. the amount they needed to make their problem go away. And like a fool, I kept writing the checks, thinking that my love could somehow fix whatever was broken in their financial management. The guilt was the worst part. Every time I felt that tiny voice in my head asking whether this was fair, whether this was sustainable, whether this was healthy, I'd push it down and tell myself I was being selfish. Good daughters don't keep score. Good sisters don't hesitate to help. Good family members sacrifice for the greater good. But what I didn't realize was that I was the only one making sacrifices. I was the only one keeping the family afloat, while everyone else lived their lives without consequence. That's the trap of toxic family financial dynamics. They convince you that your worth is tied to your willingness to give until it hurts. They make you believe that setting boundaries is selfish, that protecting your own interests is cruel, that asking questions is a betrayal of family loyalty. But here's what I learned the hard way. Generosity without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. And enabling isn't helping anyone, least of all yourself. The breaking point came in October, and it arrived with a phone call that would change everything. I was making dinner, actually looking forward to a quiet evening at home when my phone buzzed with a call from Dad. I should have known from his tone that this wasn't going to be a casual check-in. There was that familiar urgency in his voice, that edge that always appeared when money was involved. "Amanda, sweetheart, we've got a real problem here," he started, and my stomach immediately dropped. I could practically hear the dollar signs in his voice. The heating bill came in, and it's astronomical, $8,000. The gas company is threatening to shut us off if we don't pay by Friday, and with winter coming, we can't survive without heat. $8,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. It was more than any previous request, more than I had readily available, more than I could afford without completely draining my savings account. But it was also winter, and the thought of my parents freezing in their house made my chest tight with anxiety. 8,000, I repeated, trying to process the number. How did it get that high? "Oh, you know how these companies are," Dad said quickly, brushing off my question with the same dismissive tone he always used when I asked for details. "They raise the rates. They charge ridiculous fees. It's probably some billing error, but we have to pay it now and sort it out later. The important thing is that we keep the heat on." There it was again. The familiar pattern of information control. No real explanation, no breakdown of charges, no discussion of how they let the bill get so high in the first place. Just the emergency, the urgency, and the implicit expectation that I would swoop in and fix everything. "Dad, I don't have $8,000 just sitting around," I said, already knowing I was lying. I did have it, barely, but it was my entire emergency fund. It was 3 years of careful saving, of saying no to vacations and dinners out and new clothes. It was my safety net, my peace of mind, my protection against the very kind of crisis he was asking me to solve for him. "We wouldn't ask if we had any other choice," he said. And there was that guilt again, creeping into his voice like poison. "Your mother and I talked about it, and we hate to put this on you, but you're the only one who can help us. Michael's still in college, and you know how tight things are for everyone right now." Michael's still in college. The same Michael whose college debt I'd paid off 3 months earlier. The same Michael who'd managed to afford spring break in Cancun somehow. But pointing that out would make me the villain. the one keeping score, the one who wasn't understanding about family struggles. I found myself agreeing before I'd even made a conscious decision. It was like watching someone else's life, someone else making a choice that would completely devastate their financial security. "Okay," I heard myself saying, "I'll transfer the money tonight." The relief in Dad's voice was immediate and overwhelming. "Oh, Amanda, thank you so much. You're saving our lives here. We'll pay you back as soon as things turn around. I promise. You're such a good daughter." That night, I sat at my computer and transferred $8,000 from my savings account to theirs. I watched my balance drop to nearly zero, watched 3 years of careful financial planning disappear with a few clicks, but I told myself it was worth it. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was what families do for each other. What I didn't know was that 3 days later, everything would change. 3 days later, I would discover exactly how much my family valued my sacrifice. 3 days later, I would learn the difference between being needed and being loved. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was settling in with a cup of coffee and a book, still feeling good about helping my parents avoid a crisis. Dad's voice on the phone was casual, almost cheerful, a stark contrast to the desperate urgency of our conversation just 3 days before. "Hey Amanda, how are you doing?" he asked, and for a moment I thought he was calling to thank me again, maybe to update me on the heating situation. "I'm good, Dad. How's everything going with the heat? Did the payment go through okay?" "Oh yeah, everything's fine now. Actually, that's kind of what I'm calling about." His tone shifted slightly, becoming more formal, more distant. "So we've been talking about Thanksgiving plans, and we've decided to keep it small this year, just the immediate family." I felt a confused smile cross my face. "Okay, well, I'm immediate family. What time should I come over?" There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause that made my stomach start to knot. "Well, actually, Amanda, you're not invited this year." The words hit me like a slap. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it, as if somehow the device had malfunctioned and delivered the wrong message. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say. "Patricia feels uncomfortable with you being there," Dad continued, referring to his girlfriend of 6 months, whom I'd met exactly twice. "She's still adjusting to the family dynamic, and we thought it would be better to keep things simple this year. You understand?" I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. 72 hours earlier, I'd been their savior, their lifeline, the daughter they were so grateful to have. I'd emptied my savings account to keep them warm, and now I wasn't family enough to share a holiday meal? "Dad," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "I just paid your heating bill 3 days ago." "Well, yes, and we're very grateful for that," he said in the same tone he might use to thank a stranger for holding a door open. "But that doesn't really have anything to do with Thanksgiving plans. Doesn't have anything to do with it. $8,000 of my hard-earned money, my entire financial safety net, didn't have anything to do with being considered family. The math was simple and brutal. I was valuable enough to solve their problems, but not valuable enough to share their celebrations. That's when everything clicked into place. The years of requests, the pattern of crisis and rescue, the way they made me feel guilty for even hesitating to help. None of it had been about family love. It had been about utility. I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was their emergency fund with a heartbeat. The realization hit me with such force that I had to sit down. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and I felt like I might actually throw up. But underneath the shock and hurt, something else was building. Something that felt like anger, but cleaner and more focused than any anger I'd ever experienced before. For the first time in 3 years, I started thinking strategically instead of emotionally. I started asking myself questions that had nothing to do with being a good daughter and everything to do with being a smart woman who deserved better than this treatment. As Dad continued talking about how Patricia needed time to adjust and how they hoped I'd understand, I found myself pulling up my laptop and logging into my bank account. Then I navigated to another website, the utility company's customer portal. The same utility company I'd just paid $8,000 to on my family's behalf. What I found there changed everything. What I found on that utility company website was better than any Christmas morning surprise I'd ever received. There, in black and white digital text, was the account information for my parents' address. Account holder, Amanda Martinez. Payment responsibility, Amanda Martinez. Service authorization, Amanda Martinez. For the past 18 months, every single heating bill had been paid from my bank account, which meant the account was legally in my name. I stared at the screen for a full minute, letting the implications sink in. I wasn't just someone who had helped with a bill. I was the account holder. I had complete legal authority over their heating service. The power company didn't care about family dynamics or who actually lived at the address. They cared about who was financially responsible, and that person was me. My hands moved almost automatically, clicking through the account management options. There it was, in simple blue text, cancel service. 2 words that could change everything. 2 words that could show my family exactly what my financial contributions actually meant to their daily lives. But I'm not impulsive. Despite what my family had put me through, I wasn't going to make a decision this big in the heat of the moment. I needed to think this through strategically. I needed to understand all the implications. Most importantly, I needed to make sure that when I acted, it would have maximum impact. I called my best friend Sarah, the one person who'd been telling me for months that my family was taking advantage of me. Sarah was a paralegal, practical and logical, and she'd never been afraid to tell me hard truths about my situation. They did what? Sarah's voice rose an octave when I told her about the Thanksgiving ban. Amanda, they literally just took $8,000 from you 3 days ago. I know, I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. But Sarah, I found something interesting. I explained about the utility account, about my legal authority, about the power I didn't even know I had. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her legal mind working through the implications. Amanda, she said finally, you realize you could shut off their heat right now, completely legally, and there's nothing they could do about it. I know, I said again. The question is, should I? Honey, Sarah said, and her voice was gentler now. They've been using you as their personal ATM for 3 years. They just excluded you from a family holiday after you saved them from freezing. At what point do you stop being a generous family member and start being a doormat? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about timing, about impact, about making sure my message would be heard loud and clear. If I was going to do this, it needed to be strategic. It needed to be at a moment when they would truly understand what they had lost. The weather forecast sealed my decision. The temperature was supposed to drop to 35 degrees by Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. Cold enough to be genuinely uncomfortable, cold enough to make heating a necessity rather than a luxury, but not cold enough to be actually dangerous. It was perfect. Tuesday morning, I made my decision. I was going to show my family exactly what their priorities had cost them. But I wasn't going to be cruel about it. I was going to be strategic, surgical, and most importantly, I was going to give them a chance to understand exactly what they had done. I waited until 2 p.m. right after lunch, when I knew they'd be in the middle of Thanksgiving preparation. I could picture the scene. Mom in the kitchen, starting to prep vegetables. Dad probably watching football. Everyone in a good mood about their upcoming holiday celebration. The holiday celebration I wasn't invited to. I picked up my phone and dialed the utility company's customer service line. "Hi," I said when the representative answered. "I'd like to cancel service to an account I hold." I gave them the account number I'd memorized, verified my identity with the security questions, and listened as they confirmed the details. "Are you sure you want to cancel service?" the representative asked. "The weather is supposed to get quite cold this week." "I'm sure," I said. "Please cancel it effective immediately." "Okay, ma'am. Service will be disconnected within the next 2 hours. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No, that's everything. Thank you." I hung up and immediately composed a text message to my father. I rewrote it 3 times, making sure the tone was perfect. Not angry, not emotional, just matter of fact and clear. "Hi, Dad. Since I'm not family enough for Thanksgiving, I figured you didn't need family help with heating either. I've canceled the utility service that was in my name. Enjoy your holiday. Amanda." I hit send and then turned off my phone. I didn't want to see the immediate response. I didn't want to be tempted to engage in an argument or explanation. I wanted my actions to speak for themselves. For the first time in 3 years, I felt truly powerful. Not vindictive, not cruel, but powerful. I had taken control of a situation where I'd been powerless for too long. I had set a boundary that couldn't be ignored or dismissed or explained away. The silence lasted exactly 93 minutes. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had 17 missed calls from Dad, 8 from Mom, and 12 text messages ranging from confused to panicked to furious. I didn't read them immediately. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at my kitchen table, and prepared to see how my family would react when they realized that their ATM had grown arms and legs and a backbone. The first text from Dad was sent just 30 minutes after mine. "Amanda, what are you talking about? Call me immediately." 15 minutes later. "Amanda, the heat just went off. This isn't funny. Call me back." 20 minutes after that. "Amanda, your mother is upset. We need to talk about this right now." Then the tone shifted from demanding to desperate. "Amanda, please. It's getting cold in here. We can work this out." And finally, an hour and a half, after I'd sent my original message, "Amanda, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Please call me back. We need to fix this. I'm sorry. I made a mistake." In 3 years of financial requests and family emergencies and guilt trips, those were words I had never heard from my father. Not once. Even when it was obvious that their lack of planning had created their crisis, even when their requests had pushed me to my financial limit, it had never been presented as their mistake. It had always been just unfortunate circumstances that required my help. But now, suddenly, with the heat off and Thanksgiving 2 days away, it was a mistake. His mistake. I let him sit with that realization for another hour before I called him back. "Amanda," he answered on the first ring, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "Thank God, we need to talk about this." "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding about Thanksgiving," he started, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. "Patricia and I talked, and we realized we made an error in judgment. Of course you're invited, your family. We want you there." "And when did you realize this?" I asked. "Before or after the heat went off?" There was a long pause. "Amanda, that's not fair," Alaki. "What's not fair, Dad? The fact that I paid your heating bill and then got uninvited from Thanksgiving? Or the fact that I had the power to cancel the heat and chose to use it?" "You can't just leave us without heat," he said, and now I could hear the desperation creeping back into his voice. "It's going to be freezing tomorrow night." "You're right," I said. "I can't leave you without heat, but I did, because apparently I can do lots of things I didn't think I could do. Like set boundaries, like prioritize my own financial security, like refuse to be treated as an ATM by people who won't even share a holiday meal with me. Amanda, please, we'll fix the Thanksgiving thing. Patricia understands now. She knows you're important to the family." "She knows I'm important to the family," I repeated slowly. "What exactly made her understand that, Dad? Was it the $8,000 I paid to keep you warm? Or was it the fact that I took that warmth away when you decided I wasn't family enough for Thanksgiving?" Another long pause. I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Mom and Dad discussing strategy, probably. Maybe even Patricia weighing in on how to handle the family member who'd just demonstrated that she wasn't as powerless as they'd assumed. "Look," Dad said finally, "we made a mistake. I'm admitting that. What do you want me to do here?" What did I want him to do? For 3 years, I'd wanted him to appreciate my help, to acknowledge my sacrifices, to treat me like a valued family member instead of an emergency fund. I'd wanted him to set boundaries with his girlfriend about how she treated his daughter. I'd wanted him to consider my feelings before making decisions that affected me. But I'd never actually asked for any of those things. I just hoped he would figure it out on his own. "I want you to understand that my financial help is not separate from my place in this family," I said. "You can't have one without the other. You can't take my money and then exclude me from family events because your girlfriend finds me inconvenient." "I understand that now," he said quickly. "We all do." "Do you?" I asked. "Because 3 days ago, you understood that you needed $8,000 from me. But you didn't understand that excluding me from Thanksgiving would hurt me. You didn't understand that I might have feelings about being treated like a bank, rather than a daughter." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. This was probably the most direct conversation we'd had about our relationship in years. Usually, our interactions were limited to pleasant small talk or crisis management. We didn't discuss feelings. We didn't analyze family dynamics. We just moved from emergency to emergency, with me writing checks and them expressing temporary gratitude. "Amanda," he said, and his voice was quieter now, "I don't want to lose you." "Then don't," I said simply. "But understand that going forward, things are going to be different. I'm not going to be available to solve every financial crisis, especially if I'm not going to be treated as a valued family member in return. So what happens now? He asked. Will you turn the heat back on? I looked out my apartment window at the late afternoon sky. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Thanksgiving was Thursday. The temperature was supposed to drop tomorrow night, and they'd already been without heat for 4 hours. I'll turn the heat back on, I said, after I receive a genuine apology from you, and after Patricia apologizes to me directly for suggesting I shouldn't be included in family events. Amanda, that's what? I interrupted. Fair, reasonable, a natural consequence of treating your daughter like an ATM instead of a family member? He was quiet again. I could picture him weighing his options, calculating the cost of his pride against the cost of staying cold for another night. Okay, he said finally, we'll call you back in an hour. That hour was the longest 60 minutes I'd experienced in months. I wasn't nervous exactly, but I was alert. I'd just fundamentally changed the power dynamic in my family, and I wasn't sure how they were going to respond long term. But I knew one thing for certain. I was never going back to being their emergency fund without getting basic respect in return. When my phone rang again, it wasn't Dad calling, it was Mom. Amanda, honey, she said, and her voice was soft, almost timid. I owe you an apology. I waited. I'd learned the power of silence in negotiations, and this was definitely a negotiation. I should have spoken up when your father said you weren't invited to Thanksgiving, she continued. You've been so generous with us, and we've taken that for granted. That wasn't right. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. Patricia wants to talk to you too, Mom said, and I heard some shuffling as the phone was passed. Amanda, Patricia's voice was carefully controlled, probably coached. I want to apologize for suggesting you shouldn't come to Thanksgiving. I was feeling insecure about my place in the family, and I handled it poorly. I hope you'll still consider joining us. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology I'd ever received, but it was an apology. More importantly, it was an acknowledgement that she had overstepped, and that her comfort didn't trump my place in the family. Thank you, Patricia, I said. I accept your apology. Dad got back on the phone. Amanda, we're all sorry. We handled this badly. Will you please turn the heat back on? And will you come to Thanksgiving? I could have made them wait longer. I could have drawn out their discomfort, made them really feel the consequences of their choices. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. I wanted to be someone who set clear boundaries and enforced them when necessary. But I didn't want to be cruel. I'll call the utility company now, I said. And yes, I'll come to Thanksgiving. But Dad? Yes. We need to have a conversation about how financial help and family relationships work in our family. Things are going to be different going forward. I understand, he said, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely relieved, rather than just desperate. After I hung up, I called the utility company and had the service restored. Then I sat in my kitchen as the sun set, thinking about what had just happened and what it meant for my future relationship with my family. I had just learned something crucial about myself. I was capable of setting boundaries and enforcing them. I was capable of walking away from situations that didn't serve me, even when that meant disappointing people I loved. Most importantly, I was capable of demanding respect instead of just hoping for it. But I'd also learned something about my family, They were capable of change when the consequences of their behavior became real and immediate. Dad had actually apologized, when he realized that his choices had consequences he couldn't escape. Mom had acknowledged that they'd taken my generosity for granted. Even Patricia had admitted she'd overstepped. The question now was whether this change would last, or whether they'd go back to their old patterns once the immediate crisis was over. Would they remember this lesson next time they needed financial help? Would they consider my feelings before making decisions that affected me? Would they treat me like a valued family member, or would I have to cut off their utilities again to remind them of my worth? I didn't know the answers to those questions yet, but I knew that I'd learned something valuable about the relationship between power and respect. For 3 years, I'd given them all the power by making my help unconditional. I'd taught them that they could treat me however they wanted, as long as they expressed gratitude afterward. I'd shown them that my love was limitless and my boundaries were negotiable. But in one afternoon, I'd changed all of that. I'd shown them that my help came with conditions, that my presence in their lives was valuable, and that excluding me had real consequences they couldn't ignore. Thanksgiving dinner 2 days later was the most pleasant family gathering we'd had in years. Patricia was polite and included me in conversations. Dad was more attentive than usual, asking about my job and my life instead of just focusing on his own concerns. Mom seemed genuinely happy to have me there, not just grateful for my financial contributions. And for the first time in 3 years, nobody asked me for money. As I drove home that evening, I realized that I'd learned something profound about the nature of family relationships. Love without boundaries isn't actually love, it's enabling. Generosity without reciprocity isn't kindness. It's a transaction that breeds resentment on both sides. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to show them the real consequences of their choices. I still help my family when they need it, but now they ask instead of demanding. They explain instead of expecting. They include me in their lives instead of just including me in their crises. And most importantly, they've learned that I'm not just valuable for what I can give them, I'm valuable for who I am. The heating bill incident became a family legend, the story that gets retold at gatherings with a mixture of embarrassment and respect. Remember when Amanda turned off our heat, they say, and there's always a pause afterward, a moment of acknowledgement that things changed that day, that I changed that day, and I did change. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. I learned that people will treat you exactly as well as you require them to treat you. And I learned that sometimes the best gift you can give someone is a clear demonstration of what life looks like without you in it. Now, when my phone rings with a family crisis, I listen with both my heart and my head. I help when I can, but I also protect my own interests. I'm generous, but I'm not a martyr. I'm loving, but I'm not a doormat. And most importantly, I'm always invited to Thanksgiving.